In the summer of 1867, within a remote agricultural settlement close to Sedalia, Missouri, the young 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell became the subject of the most disturbing medical investigation ever formally documented in the American Midwest. Dr. Samuel Harding, the region's sole physician, filled 3 specific leather-covered journals with his careful notes of a boy whose behavior defied every known principle of human nature accepted by 19th-century medicine. The child appeared completely ordinary, even rather appealing to observers who met him briefly. Yet beneath his outwardly harmless facade rested a deep evil that the medical knowledge of that era simply could not understand in any way. During a period of 6 months, 3 individuals passed away in peculiar mishaps near Timothy Caldwell, along with many scores of livestock discovered deceased in truly puzzling situations. There were 11 people in total who had, in some distinct manner, encountered this young boy, whose slight grin never fully touched his extremely light blue eyes. The official town police records were instantly secured by the local authorities and totally concealed for over a century. But the awful reality about Timothy Caldwell reveals a seriously unsettling malevolence that truly questions everything we thought we knew about the full potential for deep cruelty in young children. Before we proceed with the full account of Timothy Caldwell and the extensive terror that completely seized Sedalia County, if this unique narrative powerfully interests you, please ensure you subscribe to our channel and quickly activate that notification icon so you never overlook our future explorations into America's most hidden historical secrets. And please inform us in the comments what particular state or major city you are currently tuning in from. We genuinely love hearing from our loyal group of committed mystery lovers across the globe. Distressing happenings that would make Timothy Caldwell instantly well known started not with a swift, brutal action, but with a major family tragedy. The state of Missouri in 1867 was still heavily enduring the ruinous harm inflicted by the Civil War. Towns such as Sedalia had sent their young men to tragically perish on far-off battlefields, leaving behind numerous struggling wives, parentless children, and entire communities frantically attempting to reconstruct their existence. The Caldwell property, located in a calm valley around 15 miles south of the town, had previously been very profitable. James and Martha Caldwell had meticulously built their residence with grand aspirations of cultivating valuable livestock and grain. But those exact hopes perished sadly with James at the fierce Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Martha frantically attempted to keep the property running by herself, but a serious chest ailment claimed her life in the bitter winter of 1865. Their son, Thomas, just 21 years old, was left with acreage he could not effectively manage and looming debts he could not realistically settle. When Thomas got the unhappy report that his brother William had passed away while imprisoned at Andersonville Prison, leaving a recent widow and an 8-year-old child, he recognized both an immediate private duty and a possible chance. The child Timothy would obviously require a stable residence, and Thomas urgently needed additional assistance with the non-stop continuous labor of managing the sizable property. Thomas Caldwell was by nature a severe, rigid man, made even more distant and tough by the recent conflict and his enormous family bereavements. His wife Sarah had become very critical and somewhat resentful during their childless marriage. Neither individual was especially prepared for the challenging task of bringing up a youngster, particularly one who arrived at their entry in the spring of 1866, holding only a small fabric sack and having peculiar, deep eyes that appeared far too aged for his youthful features. Timothy Caldwell was distinctly undersized for his actual age, with conspicuously fair skin that readily scorched in the intense Missouri sun, and fair hair that his Aunt Sarah maintained cut quite short to prevent head pests. He talked very sparingly about his prior life before arriving at the property, only sharing brief pieces when directly questioned. His father had been a fighter, he mentioned. His mother had spit up blood. He had resided briefly with various families for a short span after she died. What most powerfully impressed adults regarding Timothy was his outstanding courtesy. He unfailingly said, "Yes, sir," and "Yes, ma'am," every time. He never once griped about the hard labor or any harsh discipline. He seemed in every respect to be the ultimate flawless model of a totally obedient young person. Dr. Samuel Harding initially encountered Timothy in June of 1866 when the child accompanied his uncle to the settlement to get essential provisions. Harding, a graduate of the Missouri Medical College and one of the rare well-educated physicians west of St. Louis, had acquired a keen skill for judging people during his many years caring for injured Union and Confederate troops. Something concerning the Caldwell child immediately made him feel uncomfortable, even though he could not precisely identify the cause. The boy was completely polite, Harding would later precisely record in his personal log. He responded to my exact inquiries immediately, consistently held suitable eye contact, and exhibited none of the anxious wiggling or normal reserve that is common among country children when they meet unfamiliar people. However, I felt deeply ill at ease during his sudden appearance. His strong stare contained an exact concentration that seemed to imply he was actually observing me with the same emotionless, detached curiosity that I normally kept for all my patients. The agricultural area situated around Sedalia was sufficiently small that everyone was aware of almost all of everyone else's private affairs. The Caldwell property was physically separated, but not so distant that adjacent neighbors neglected to see specific events. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose holdings directly adjoined the Caldwell acreage, would frequently see Timothy laboring intently in the areas or diligently looking after the livestock. She remarked to her spouse that the child toiled with an uncommon and strong concentration for a youngster his particular age, never seeming to grow weary, never pausing whatsoever to engage in games or rest, as young boys typically do. It was precisely like observing a small automatic apparatus, she mentioned to her husband Samuel during their supper one night. He would labor consistently from early dawn to late dusk, never griping about a single thing, never decelerating even marginally. It is simply not normal for any small child to have completely no wish for games within him. The Patterson property maintained numerous poultry, and Elelanena distinctly saw that her fowl became noticeably uneasy whenever Timothy came near their boundary. They would swiftly gather, shrieking loudly and fluffing their plumage, utterly unwilling to approach the barrier that divided the two holdings. Her spouse merely disregarded this conduct as a simple accident, but Elelanena could not discard the strong impression that the livestock inherently understood something accurate about the child that grown humans neglected to detect. The initial sad death occurred on a scorching afternoon in August 1866. Young Mary Fletcher, just 5 years old, was the daughter of the nearby settlement's metal worker, and known throughout the area for her very cheerful giggle and her habit of easily straying away by herself. She had been enjoying herself close to Willow Creek, a small, slim watercourse that ran between various adjacent holdings, including the Caldwell property. Timothy was the person who truly discovered her tiny corpse. He reached the Fletcher household just as the family was readying their night food, his garments conspicuously wet and his face white with what appeared to be true, intense anguish. "Mrs. Fletcher," he stated, his youthful voice unusually stable despite his obvious anxiety. "I located Mary near the watercourse. She is not breathing currently." The rescue group that swiftly hurried to the watercourse found Mary Fletcher lying face down in water that was scarcely 18 inches deep. Dr. Harding, called instantly, concluded that the child had submerged, a sad but not completely rare mishap in country regions where young boys and girls frequently played without suitable grown-up oversight near liquid. What worried Harding was not the actual fatality itself, but Timothy's exceptionally specific account of finding the small corpse. The boy provided a notably accurate depiction of the precise spot where Mary had been discovered, the exact placement of her remains, and the precise state of her attire. When cautiously asked how he had occurred to be in that very distinct location at that specific moment, Timothy quietly clarified that he had been diligently searching for a missing young cow. The child's recollection was surprisingly accurate, Harding noted in his private log. He could flawlessly depict the precise arrangement of the dead child's appendages, the manner her gown had gotten strongly held on an underwater tree limb, even the exact shade of the liquid right near her face. Such distinct focus on specifics seemed greatly uncommon for a child who said he was both scared and intensely saddened by the dreadful find. Thomas Caldwell, when interviewed thoroughly, verified that one of their small young cows had truly vanished that specific morning, and that he had officially instructed Timothy to actively explore the watercourse vicinity. The young cow was located 2 days later, totally healthy and calmly feeding in a tranquil grassland, almost a mile away from the location where Mary Fletcher had submerged. The Fletcher household, utterly heartbroken by their abrupt misfortune, accepted Timothy's offered compassion with great thanks. He had, in essence, been the individual who discovered their girl and instantly warned them of the awful event. At the sorrowful burial service, Timothy rested very silently with his aunt and uncle. His youthful head was lowered in respect during the whole religious ceremony. When the family genuinely thanked him for his swift response in notifying them, he received their thanks with suitable seriousness. "I honestly wish I could have discovered her far earlier," he told Mary's deeply grieved father, his voice using the precisely correct expression of remorse and sadness. But Elena Patterson, observing the young child from her bench across the sanctuary, saw one detail that troubled her for several days subsequently. When Mary Fletcher's mother strongly fell apart in distress during the ceremony, when the visible image of the minuscule casket brought multiple robust adult males to weep, Timothy Caldwell's face never altered at all. His head was lowered in seeming sadness, but when he momentarily believed no one was looking right at him, his light blue eyes stayed entirely moisture-free and closely observant, absorbing every tiny specific of the disastrous event happening nearby. The second sad fatality occurred 3 weeks following. Elder Henrik Len, a particular Scandinavian settler who had labored hard as a lumberjack before crippling joint inflammation made him retire, was sadly discovered at the foot of a sharp, stony precipice called Devil's Bluff by locals. The steep hill immediately overlooked the watercourse where Mary Fletcher had submerged, and Henrik was generally known to ascend there quite frequently to inspect the untamed bee shelters he individually managed. Once again, Timothy Caldwell was personally implicated in the abrupt finding. He had been walking toward his residence from the nearby settlement when he swiftly noticed something very strange at the bottom of the precipice. "I observed Mr. Len's unique cap snagged on a particular spiky plant," Timothy informed the small assembling group. "I strongly shouted to him, but I got no distinct reply, so I cautiously descended to examine things nearer." Henrik Larsson was plainly deceased, his neck harshly fractured from what looked like a violent tumble from the sheer peak of the 40-foot cliff. Dr. Harding's expert inspection showed that the aged man had most probably died right away upon hitting the ground. The only genuinely odd detail of the whole location was the clear existence of numerous lifeless bees dispersed around the corpse, many more than would typically be found so distant from a functioning bee shelter. Mr. Lawson knew those particular cliffs much more intimately than any other individual in the whole county, Samuel Patterson mentioned to Dr. Harding after the inspection was complete. He'd been going up there for no less than 3 entire years. He never even had a slight trip. It makes completely no logical sense that he would unexpectedly drop at this time. Timothy, when asked, merely proposed that perhaps the elderly man had been fiercely attacked by many bees and lost his steady foothold. He was constantly discussing precisely how upset they become when you unintentionally bother them, the child stated quietly. Perhaps they mobbed him forcefully, and he got extremely disoriented. Dr. Harding considered Timothy's plain account reasonable enough, but something concerning the full situation still seriously troubled him. The lifeless bees were all packed closely into a tiny zone immediately surrounding Henrik's still remains. If the aged man had fiercely disrupted a bee shelter at the extreme peak of the cliff, there ought to have been considerably more obvious sign of insect movement along his assumed route of escape and following drop. In contrast, it powerfully seemed as if the bees had somehow been deliberately gathered precisely near the point of impact. When Harding afterwards ascended to the peak of the cliff to carefully check the bee shelters, he found them all entirely undamaged and displaying completely no signs of any fresh interference. The foraging bees were exceptionally busy, but not in any way stressed, peacefully proceeding with their usual task of collecting sweet liquid from the final summer wild blossoms. The third sad fatality immediately destroyed any lingering false beliefs regarding simple chance. In September 1866, young 6-year-old Jacob Mills abruptly disappeared while harmlessly engaging in games in the thick forest close to his family's small dwelling. His remains were unfortunately located 4 days later in a neglected, disused shaft almost half a mile from where he had last been certainly observed. Timothy Caldwell had instantly offered to participate in the organized search group. For 3 lengthy days, Timothy carefully looked next to the grown-up helpers, demonstrating notable bodily stamina for a child his years. He appeared to be familiar with the dense forest exceptionally well, directing searchers through concealed spots that even permanent inhabitants found greatly challenging to traverse. When straightforwardly asked how he had mastered the challenging landscape so proficiently, Timothy quietly clarified that he frequently thoroughly examined the forest during his spare hours, actively seeking helpful flora and spices that his aunt could utilize for meals and for simple remedies. On the 4th day, Timothy abruptly arrived at the Mills dwelling just following the morning's first light. "I believe I discovered something definite," he informed Jacob's father, his youthful voice weighed down with what seemed like genuine tiredness. "There is an aged shaft approximately half a mile north of this place. I distinctly heard what sounded like soft weeping. Following the sad burial service, Dr. Harding created a particular reason to check the neglected shaft where Jacob had been located. The place greatly bothered him for many causes he could not plainly express. The shaft was truly exceptionally well veiled, obscured by organic matter that would have needed noteworthy intentional labor to shift. Still, Timothy had forcefully asserted he heard soft weeping from this exact spot, an affirmation that seemed unbelievably improbable considering the great depth of the shaft and the considerable volume of undergrowth totally shielding it. As Harding studied the area even more closely, he observed a vital element that the first aid group had utterly overlooked in their massive haste to rescue young Jacob Mills. Surrounding the clear edge of the shaft, the loose material had been placed with a very uncommon accuracy. Tree trunks and different boughs that should have dropped haphazardly displayed definite proof of purposeful, exact positioning, fashioning a naturally appearing disguise that would be almost impossible for anyone to detect unless they understood precisely where to search. The awful results were too upsetting for the doctor to speak out loud, but Harding could not entirely dismiss the mounting doubt that Jacob Mills had not just coincidentally tumbled into the shaft. Someone had purposefully put him there, and someone had then very diligently hidden the spot until the child was much too frail to potentially live through a retrieval. That very night, Harding started recording comprehensive, cautious remarks about Timothy Caldwell. If his increasing doubts were accurate, the young child represented a grave threat to the whole little settlement. But simple doubts were not solid proof, and solid proof was precisely what Dr. Harding entirely needed. The main difficulty was that Timothy Caldwell was, by every outward sign, the example of a flawless boy. He went to worship every week consistently with his aunt and uncle, sitting silently during the ceremonies and cautiously repeating all the solemn words with suitable respect. He labored non-stop and carefully on the property, finishing duties that would severely test many grown-up laborers. He talked exceptionally politely to older people and constantly displayed suitable regard for all power-holding individuals. Most critically, Timothy consistently had totally believable, logical justifications for his particular location at the scene of every disaster. He had been actively searching for a missing young cow when he supposedly discovered Mary Fletcher. He had been heading to his residence from the settlement when he alleged to see Henrik Lenn's unique cap. He had formally offered to assist in the active hunt for Jacob Mills, as any worried neighborhood resident would normally perform. But Dr. Harding's broad medical education had precisely trained him to look well past mere outer appearances. In cautiously tending to badly injured troops, he had learned to quickly identify the faint indications of males who murdered not because of national loyalty or urgent need, but from something much more sinister and inherent within them. There was an obvious lack of warmth in such particular individuals, a clear separation from typical human feeling that showed up in very slight forms. Too minimal noticeable response to the terror, too much precise fascination with watching the pain, a distinct skill for speaking about brutality with an emotionless, detached objectivity. Timothy Caldwell plainly exhibited all of these seriously disturbing features, but they were confined totally into the small physique and guileless face of an 8-year-old youngster. Dr. Harding's private inquiry genuinely started seriously in October 1866. Utilizing his honored status as the settlement's sole doctor, he made common, consistent visits to properties and residences all over the nearby vicinity, allegedly checking on the overall well-being of households still bouncing back from the severe difficulties of the conflict. In truth, he was painstakingly collecting distinct data regarding Timothy Caldwell. What he slowly uncovered created a worrisome image of a child who appeared to stand exactly at the heart of a continuously widening ring of awful bad luck. Farm animals on many adjacent properties had been perishing at greatly abnormal speeds, not due to typical sickness, but from what looked like peculiar, sudden, unplanned wounds. Poultry were located with neat, snapped necks, seemingly murdered by sly canines that left completely no other evidence of being a predator close by. Swine endured puzzling, serious cuts that rapidly turned septic and finally resulted in fatality. Equines abruptly developed severe crippling that compelled owners to compassionately destroy them. Mrs. Elalana Patterson confessed straight to Dr. Harding that she had sadly lost 17 fowl in the last 2 months only. "It is the single most bizarre event I have ever witnessed," she commented with an anxious voice. "They are passing away 1 or 2 at a time, always discovered early in the day with their necks neatly snapped. My spouse honestly believes it is wild dogs doing this, but I have never once observed any sign of a predator near the fowl pen, and the particular manner they are killed, it's too precise, too structured." When Harding carefully inspected the most recent fatalities, he found extremely plain proof that powerfully backed Eleanor's strong concerns. The poultry had been executed with accurate, concentrated pressure used on distinct areas on their necks, a sinister method that required significant comprehension of body structure. It was completely not the accidental, disorganized brutality common in most beast assaults, but something far more intentional, planned, and totally managed. Related disturbing trends rapidly appeared on different properties. James Wickham had abruptly lost 3 young cows to what he precisely termed as sheer odd mishaps. These were livestock that had somehow achieved killing themselves by strangulation on regular cords, or squeezing their heads forcefully in barrier posts in peculiar manners that utterly defied all rational understanding. Robert Dunham's greatly valued male cow had somehow dropped into a trench and snapped its limb, despite being commonly recognized as one of the most steady-moving beasts in the whole region. In every solitary situation, the impacted properties were totally within simple strolling distance of the Caldwell acreage, and in various distinct examples, local people reported plainly viewing Timothy in the direct area close to the exact moment of the event. I watched him moving along our particular barrier just the morning before we discovered the young cow, James Wickham honestly informed Dr. Harding. I genuinely thought it was strange, him being so distant from his own residence, but the child was consistently very courteous when he saw me. He signaled and shouted a brief welcome exactly like he was appropriately instructed. Dr. Harding also started giving far more detailed notice to Timothy's conduct during his regular standard medical trips to the Caldwell property. The child was consistently there during these calls, remaining silently in the edge while Dr. Harding expertly checked his aunt and uncle for the different minor illnesses normal to rural existence. But Harding plainly detected that Timothy viewed these medical inspections with greatly uncommon fascination, asking very thorough inquiries regarding human body structure and exact surgical techniques that seemed greatly sophisticated for a child his distinct years. How do you know definitely if a person is truly entirely lifeless? Timothy abruptly inquired during one such trip, his manner totally relaxed, as though simply chatting about the outside air. Sometimes individuals just appear precisely as if they are only resting. When urged to account for his profound interest, Timothy asserted he was only concerned about being able to capably aid if someone was seriously injured while he was by himself on the property. Uncle Thomas particularly says I must know precisely how to manage actual urgent events since we are so far distant from the settlement, he smoothly clarified. The justification was totally logical, but something about the core inquiry itself seriously worried Dr. Harding. There was a detached, emotionless nature to Timothy's strong fascination with both fatality and major trauma that exceeded typical juvenile inquisitiveness. The boy repeatedly asked about the precise process of perishing, the duration it required in different situations, what particular indicators to seek, and if people could genuinely survive diverse forms of bodily damage, all with the identical, disconnected, frigid curiosity that a surgical scholar might display when carefully examining human corpses. Throughout these very peculiar discussions, Harding started cunningly checking Timothy's true understanding with intentionally untrue details, asserting that definite, precise wounds were deadly when they were not, or that specific indications clearly pointed to particular terminal states. Timothy never straightforwardly disputed these untrue declarations publicly, but Harding plainly observed that the child rapidly stored every solitary piece of data with genuinely impressive memory. Even more unsettling was Timothy's odd reaction to Dr. Harding's combat tales about caring for badly harmed troops throughout the Civil War. While most young children demonstrated suitable surprise or strong distress when hearing about dreadful fighting injuries, Timothy paid attention with total, absorbed focus, asking exceptionally thorough inquiries about exact injury styles, liquid loss quantities, and individual endurance chances. Did they shriek powerfully often when you abruptly amputated their limbs? Timothy inquired throughout one such unnerving discussion, his light blue eyes focused intensely on Dr. Harding's features. Or were they merely too severely harmed to even produce a solitary sound? The particular inquiry, stated in Timothy's distinctively courteous and tranquil manner, transmitted a strong shiver through Dr. Harding that he would never completely put out of his mind. By November 1866, Dr. Harding had totally filled close to 2 entire logs with distinct notes regarding Timothy Caldwell. The particular image that powerfully arose was that of a boy who plainly owned a grown-up's total grasp of both brutality and fatality, coupled with an absolute entire void of typical human sympathy. But cautious record-keeping was absolutely not identical to solid proof. And solid proof was precisely what Harding would critically require if he ever wished to suitably safeguard the settlement from what he progressively saw as a greatly hazardous attacker. The crucial chance to collect that undeniable proof arrived when Thomas Caldwell severely damaged his spine throughout the autumn reaping. The wound strictly demanded uninterrupted resting and consistent daily doctor calls, affording Dr. Harding remarkable, steady entry to the whole Caldwell residence. Throughout these standard trips, he started involving Timothy in much lengthier, more investigative discussions, cautiously attempting to fully comprehend the precise scope of the child's understanding and the actual character of his sinister ideas. What he slowly found truly surpassed his most awful, most frightening anxieties. Timothy Caldwell had been diligently carrying out cruel tests on live beings for numerous months, perhaps even a few years. Utilizing a mix of cautious, particular inquiries and immediate close study, Dr. Harding conclusively found that the boy had been methodically seizing and ceaselessly abusing small creatures, meticulously analyzing their true reactions to different types of trauma and severe pain. Timothy had distinctly referenced a nearby cavern during one of their lengthy talks, describing it as a secluded spot where he consistently went to reflect intensely and be entirely solitary. When Dr. Harding privately explored the area, he located a scrupulously arranged assortment of neat animal skeletons, basic medical tools that Timothy had created from regular farming equipment, and a set of upsetting, thorough sketches that carefully recorded different sinister tests involving agony and damage. The accurate sketches were the most genuinely unsettling find. Produced with remarkably good artistic talent for a child, they plainly depicted rabbits, tree rodents, fowl, and even some bigger creatures in diverse stages of intentional cutting apart and wounding. Every sketch was expressly joined by distinct comments penned in Timothy's cautious, clean writing describing the creature's precise responses, the exact period of time it took them to eventually pass away, and his detached notes on which specific approaches plainly resulted in the greatest pain. Entities stayed totally awake for roughly 10 complete minutes following the intentional extraction of visual organs, read one record right next to a comprehensive sketch of a rabbit. Sounds lessened only slowly, motion entirely stopped only after the use of powerful force to the windpipe. Dr. Harding immediately understood that Timothy had been methodically utilizing the settlement's harmless creatures as entities for progressively complex, sinister tests in brutality. The unplanned fatalities that had taken place on many adjacent properties were truly the immediate consequence of Timothy's strong wish to try his harsh approaches on steadily bigger entities. But the most completely frightening finding of all was a more recent group of accurate sketches that displayed obvious human shapes in place of mere creatures. These more recent drawings plainly showed boys, girls, and grown-ups in diverse distinct positions of agony and major trauma. Each was cautiously joined by particular, theoretical comments regarding human body structure and different possible ways of inflicting definite damage. One sketch plainly displayed a shape that was certainly Mary Fletcher, the initial child to sadly pass away. Another particularly illustrated Henrik Lenn. A third plainly showed Jacob Mills at the deepest point of a shaft, with very comprehensive explanations about the distinct, bad impacts of fluid loss and low-temperature vulnerability on the human physique. Timothy Caldwell had not just been accidentally there when these particular individuals expired. He had scrupulously organized their fatalities, carried out those schemes with emotionless, systematic accuracy, and then precisely recorded the awful outcomes for his personal later research. As Dr. Harding would quickly find out, The enormous terror in Sedalia County was greatly far from being entirely finished. If this narrative is presently giving you strong shivers, please swiftly share this recording with a close companion who also deeply likes sinister historical secrets. Press that thumbs up symbol immediately to actively help our content making, and please do not neglect to instantly subscribe to never skip other accounts precisely like this one. Let's critically find out together what precisely occurs next. Dr. Harding now encountered a seemingly unachievable predicament. The plain proof in the cavern showed without doubt that Timothy Caldwell was individually liable for numerous sad fatalities, but that particular proof had been acquired via what equaled a totally unauthorized investigation. Furthermore, the genuinely astonishing concept that a simple 8-year-old could be a plotting, systematic killer was so completely beyond the normal comprehension of human disposition that no regular legal body would ever approve such a serious assertion. The medical knowledge of 1867 held completely no structure or method for precisely grasping concepts such as antisocial conduct syndrome or sociopathy. The dominant general opinion was that all youngsters were innately totally harmless, spoiled solely by poor external effects or major distressing personal events. The core notion that a child could truly be born missing the basic ability for compassion or ethical logic was literally utterly unimaginable to most common individuals back then. Dr. Harding accurately realized that if he individually gave his discoveries to local officials, he would nearly certainly be rejected at once as a man whose thoughts had been forever harmed by too many challenging years caring for combat victims. The bodily proof would be readily dismissed as something different. Timothy would be forcefully protected as only a deeply troubled child expressing his major sadness, and the murders would certainly go on. Instead, Dr. Harding finally chose to challenge Timothy face to face and secretly. Throughout his very next medical trip to the Caldwell property, he simply requested the child to stroll with him to inspect the animals situated in the distant field. As soon as they were totally by themselves, Dr. Harding quietly disclosed precisely what he had effectively found within the cavern. Timothy's strong response was genuinely not what Dr. Harding had anticipated in any way. The boy displayed completely no astonishment, no instant rejection, and completely no fright at being found out. Instead, he heard completely peacefully as Dr. Harding precisely depicted the sketches and the records, sometimes merely agreeing with his head as though confirming the full exactness of the doctor's particular comments. "You are not genuinely going to inform anyone," Timothy declared plainly once Dr. Harding had finished talking. It was not an inquiry requesting assurance or a frantic appeal for compassion, but a simple, direct declaration of truth. "And why do you suppose that, Timothy?" "Because you are strongly fascinated by me," the child replied, gazing right into the doctor's view. "Because if you hand me over to the authorities, the profound scientific riddle is entirely finished, and you won't get to genuinely discover anything more about what I am or what I will perform. You also know they will not genuinely trust you whatsoever," he stated peacefully, "and because you are greatly intrigued by what precisely I will execute next." The young child was totally right on both specific points. Dr. Harding understood entirely well that his particular assertions would sound exactly like the frantic madness of a man presently forfeiting his own mental health. But Timothy had also accurately pointed out a secret fact that the doctor was very unwilling to fully confess, even internally. A deep scholarly interest in closely watching the full evolution of what might indeed be the only most hazardous person he had ever crossed paths with in his whole existence. "How long have you genuinely been performing these actions?" Dr. Harding asked the child. "Since I was 5 years old," Timothy answered quietly, plainly, perhaps even much prior to that. "I began with tiny bugs, then progressed to rodents, and then I moved on to larger live entities. It is truly captivating to closely watch how diverse creatures respond to precisely the same procedures, he clarified. And the individuals who sadly perished? Timothy simply lifted his youthful shoulders. They were just tests as well. I seriously desired to see if people would respond in precisely the identical particular fashion as the creatures. They mainly do, yes, but they are much more capable of clearly recognizing what is currently befalling them. That sole variation makes it much more fascinating to monitor. Dr. Harding sensed a deep coldness that held completely no connection to the crisp November atmosphere. What exactly do you intend to do next, Timothy? Timothy genuinely pondered the straightforward inquiry for a lengthy instant before eventually responding. I am going to end the lives of Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah. Today, before they arise, I possess a new strategy that is far more effective and will demonstrate a clearer reason for their demise that even you will be compelled to regard as normal. The boy spoke of homicide with the disconnected passion of a painter outlining a new, groundbreaking technique for art. Why them? Dr. Harding questioned, struggling to keep his own voice completely steady. Because they are conveniently accessible, and because they are the final two subjects in my present research group, Timothy answered, his look changing from detached interest to a slight sign of mild irritation, as if being interrogated about such an evident matter was somewhat annoying. And because I must verify that my techniques succeed on my main providers too, especially since they are already physically frail from major sickness and wounds. Timothy's obvious truthfulness was an unnerving type of influence. He understood that Dr. Harding's professional commitment, mixed with his intellectual vanity, would make him pause just enough time to keep hearing. The doctor was instantly thrust into an awful ethical predicament. If he took action immediately, he could possibly rescue Thomas and Sarah Caldwell, but he would forfeit his sole chance to completely grasp the child's deep depravity, a mental case file that could possibly enlighten the whole planet regarding the sources of total malevolence. But if he waited, he would turn into a reluctant, quiet participant in a dual killing. Harding chose to intervene, but not without initially testing the boy one final time. And what if I escape now, Timothy? What will you personally perform then? That is also a segment of the test, Timothy responded, his grin broadening slightly. My objective is not merely to see how my targets expire, Doctor, but to monitor how other particular individuals react when they totally realize that they are utterly unable to stop the fatality. He motioned toward his uncle's nightstand, where an assortment of rough, sharp tools was neatly organized, a lengthy handled utensil honed to a specific tip, a piece of old metal thread wound into a particular strangulation device, and a small, extremely sharp cooking blade. I have prepared 3 distinct plans for their ending. The exact one I implement relies completely on your precise next move. I am intrigued to discover which exact death is the most gratifying to execute, and I'm strongly interested to see how a man of research responds when he fully observes pure basic wickedness function right before his own sight. Dr. Harding understood he could not genuinely dominate a person who was already planning homicide with such peaceful, systematic accuracy. He required immediate, external support. He was dressed in his typical outdoor coat, under which was hidden a small medical satchel, and inside that pouch was a compact military firearm he had carried constantly since departing the army. I am going to examine your aunt initially, Timothy, he stated, moving sluggishly toward the sleeping area entrance. You should instantly go check on the livestock in the shelter while I am occupied doing that. Your Uncle Thomas demands steady, profound relaxation to entirely mend from his painful wound. Timothy's look of cold, detached interest instantly converted into something that appeared far more like a slight, amused defiance. "I already recognize that you possess a specific Navy Colt gun within your pouch, Doctor," he mentioned, his voice still perfectly courteous. "I also know that you have wisely reached out to the local lawman, and that 3 of his deputies are presently waiting outside the acreage, cunningly placed near the rear forest boundary. I am aware of all of this because I personally saw the particular prints they left, and I overheard the precise talks they conducted when they came just after the morning's first light." Dr. Harding felt a surge of total surprise move over him. The child's intellect was genuinely astonishing. Not only had he precisely guessed the doctor's moves, but he had faultlessly foreseen the distinct defenses and had then quietly readied himself for the resulting conflict. "My present purpose is not to end your life, Doctor," Timothy went on, sensing the doctor's great mental anguish. "You are far too important to me to merely destroy. My purpose is to force you to observe my last, most complex test, the human reaction to absolute, complete inability to act. My sole expectation for you is that the 3 deputies outside are exceptionally good marksmen." Timothy's full, real grin eventually came back, now wider and more obviously threatening than earlier. "You understand, I have cautiously set 3 specific kitchen blades beneath Uncle Thomas's headrest, 3 specific P items directly below Aunt Sarah's duvet, and I have cleverly positioned the final 3 knives in 3 distinct spots where the deputies will nearly certainly look the quickest when they eventually come into the dwelling. Your 6 rounds, Doctor, will rescue only 6 individuals in total, if you are extremely fortunate, and deploy them flawlessly. You have already opted to save Thomas and Sarah, but you must now decide which of the 3 law enforcement agents you are completely prepared to give up. They are currently lined up, by the way, in a perfect direct row right from the rear entrance to the glass opening." The frigid mathematics of Timothy's reasoning was completely undeniable. Dr. Harding was totally overpowered. Timothy had not simply estimated the chances. He had engineered them, managing every solitary aspect with unnerving, systematic expertise. He was not just a killer. He was a clever, emotionally void master strategist, executing a lethal, a high-risk mental contest where every individual action was planned well ahead of time. "You cannot potentially grasp what I am, Doctor," Timothy had once stated throughout one of their strange, investigative talks. "Your human mind is utterly restricted by guidelines you did not even know existed. You only see a boy. I see a fresh, more productive way for humankind to function. You search for the indications of evil to safeguard society. I look for the signs of virtue to learn how to skillfully identify them before they seriously begin causing fatalities." Every specific declaration was totally correct, and Timothy's upsetting skill to precisely spot and misuse Dr. Harding's deep scholarly interest was equally as terrifying as his unquestionable physical aptitude for harsh brutality. The young child comprehended people sufficiently to instantly forecast their particular conduct and then cleverly control their responses, even when they were fully conscious that they were presently being influenced. The closing short standoff came when Timothy peacefully walked up to his resting uncle with a long piece of cord firmly held in his grasp. Dr. Harding instantly moved ahead quickly to bodily interfere, but Timothy acted with surprising rapid speed and powerful force, abruptly pulling out the concealed kitchen blade and cutting sharply at the doctor's outstretched limb. The brutal fight that immediately ensued was short but extremely intense. Timothy battled with the frantic, crude savagery of a truly trapped wild beast, using the sharp blade with a knack that powerfully indicated significant prior effort. The following sounds of the tussle, the shouts, the desperate noises of the conflict, and the swift breaking of a glass lamp eventually brought the local lawman and his personnel into the dwelling. They instantly found the doctor, losing much blood from his limb, grappling with the small, fair-skinned child who had been generally viewed as the neighborhood's example of a faultless boy. Timothy was swiftly overpowered and detained. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell were rushed instantly to the nearby health center for urgent medical assistance and thankfully lived through their harrowing experience, although their immediate healing was long and challenging. Dr. Harding's wounds were not lethal, but he spent many weeks recuperating from the deep knife cut and the severe mental trauma of the strong confrontation. The official local police records meticulously documented the plain, unquestionable proof. The intentional positioning of the different logs and undergrowth surrounding the shaft, the unsettling sketches and notes discovered inside the cavern, and Timothy's unlucky yet predictable tendency of being very useful throughout all urgent situations. The witnessed effort to murder Thomas and Sarah Caldwell, however, could absolutely not be readily dismissed by anyone. 3 courageous law enforcement deputies had personally seen Timothy violently assaulting his unconscious family members with clear, undeniable purpose to end their lives. Even the most compassionate public onlookers could not potentially claim that a young 8-year-old child would repeatedly assault his own relatives with a sharp blade unless something deeply basic was utterly incorrect with his essential personality. The judicial structure of 1867 held completely no contemporary system for appropriately managing severely brutal children. Timothy was judged much too youthful for formal grown-up conviction, but he was concurrently seen as far too risky for straightforward lodging in a regular children's home or standard corrective institution. The incident created never-before-seen lawful hurdles for Missouri's legal processes, instantly drawing strong notice from legal experts and health practitioners from all across the area. Following weeks of strong legal disagreement and broad dialogue with specialists from as far off as Boston and Philadelphia, a lawful settlement was finally effectively agreed upon. Timothy would be officially sent to the specific care of the Missouri State Asylum for the Mentally Unwell, situated in Fulton, where he would be intensely analyzed and cared for by the most cutting-edge mental doctors, psychiatrists, available anywhere in the whole territory. The very challenging judgment pleased completely no one entirely. State lawyers frantically wished Timothy tried and executed as a fully accountable grown-up for killing, while defense counselors powerfully maintained that no child so extremely young could possibly be held legally liable for his hazardous deeds. Health experts were sharply split on what Timothy's actual state signified, but most concurred that the child exhibited a frightening mix of severe mental capacity and an entire void of human morality. But Dr. Harding, keeping up his careful monitoring, swiftly noticed that Timothy was merely intensely analyzing the individuals all close to him, continuously figuring out how to expertly influence them even more successfully than previously. The child had already generated what equaled a full psychological record of all human feeling-based responses, and he could effortlessly replicate these particular signs with genuinely impressive correctness, despite feeling absolutely none of the core sentiments himself. The entity plainly shows outstanding mental capabilities, paired with a total, complete lack of any honest feeling-based reaction, Dr. Harding precisely noted in his thorough health documents. He has effectively learned to reproduce totally standard human responses with enough expertise to entirely fool all brief viewers rapidly. But prolonged, careful watching clearly discloses the entire presentation to be completely false and fabricated. Timothy only comprehends joy as the look people reliably make when they intensely wish something positive to persist, and misery as the expression people consistently make when they intensely want others to promptly support them. But he has never truly and actually gone through either distinct emotion himself. Dr. Harding's cautious assessment also entirely disclosed that the child's obsession with human misery had not diminished, but had truly grown more intensely precise. He spent his long hours meticulously organizing progressively complex, lethal tests that would make his former killings appear almost childishly limited in a scary comparison. He has devised greatly complicated, thorough scenarios for checking human reactions to diverse forms of severe mental and bodily torment, Dr. Harding reported privately and immediately. His sinister strategies plainly exhibit outstanding inventiveness and scrupulous focus on particulars, as well as a complex, high-level grasp of human mental processes. If he were ever permitted to fully grow up and effectively acquire extra means, he would nearly certainly turn into one of the most hazardous and active people in all of United States history. The institution documents precisely show that Timothy formally stayed at the particular place for 18 months. Throughout that full time, numerous unexplainable odd happenings silently took place that unfortunately carried all the exact characteristics of Timothy's sinister approaches. Other individuals were sadly discovered lifeless in uncommon situations, them late at night, remaining silently right next to their resting places and intently viewing them slumber peacefully. Institution personnel who labored most immediately with Timothy also soon started having various peculiar issues. Several committed female nurses reported continuous, horrifying night visions after spending any span of time with the peculiar child, dreams that very frequently included thorough plans of their own, purposeful, systematic demise, occasionally with Timothy calmly standing above them in a precise white medical gown. The institution leadership, facing a serious, mounting breakdown in spirit, eventually consented to transfer Timothy to a distant separation section, hoping that severely reducing his connection with other individuals would finally halt the awful trend of unexplainable fatalities. But Timothy only adjusted and persisted in his sinister work by finding a fresh method of conversation, a complex, impossible-to-crack coded diary. Timothy had cleverly persuaded one of the female nurses to give him unused paper and a writing stick for healing writing activities, falsely asserting that scrupulously logging his most hidden ideas and sentiments would certainly assist him in effectively handling his strong feelings more productively. The diary initially looked like it held precisely what Timothy had formerly stated, daily notations meticulously detailing his harmless thoughts, his profound sadness regarding all previous deeds, and his strong desires for future total recovery. The writing was suitably juvenile in its vocabulary and distinct feeling-based matter, and it created a flawless image of a deeply suffering but basically savable young individual diligently striving to permanently conquer severe, distressing life events. But Dr. Fitzgerald's particular education in high-level European mental practices included broad knowledge of intricate coded messaging structures. When she expertly utilized specialized examination methods to Timothy's diary, she instantly found that the innocent-looking entries truly contained a greatly complex secret writing method. Once the intricate cipher was successfully resolved, the actual deeply terrifying content of the log was completely shown. It held a full, new scheme for escaping the asylum, a thorough inventory of all the failings and weak spots of every solitary staff member, and a frightening statement of his future aims: to turn into the most successful, most active murderer in United States history, methodically picking his victims based on their goodness, their purity, or their strong potential for genuine, selfless affection, purely for the happiness of intentionally and spitefully ruining those very attributes. Timothy's instant, lasting separation was swiftly commanded, but the unsettling reality about the full range of his sinister schemes was finally, undoubtedly understood. Soon after his shift to the secure containment section, Timothy Caldwell completely disappeared. The official institution record states simply that the 9-year-old child got away on a dark, stormy evening in March 1868, never to be seen or formally detained once more. The direct specifics of his precise departure were always closely protected by the state officials, but Dr. Harding's personal logs powerfully imply that Timothy was most likely aided by an unnamed member of the hospital workers, someone who had been expertly controlled by the child's sly, fake requests for genuine pity. The wider, serious consequences of his successful departure seriously worried Dr. Harding for the whole remainder of his existence. Timothy Caldwell, in all his frigid, plotting genius, was the terrifying, fresh result of an aged human setting, an individual who had cleverly adjusted to the flaws of ethical society, becoming robust enough to readily overwhelm grown-up targets, and definitely much more complex and smart enough to effectively skip the simple errors that had caused his initial capture. His prolonged duration of thorough analysis in human mental processes, skillfully merged with his innate, great intellect and total lack of any ethical limitation, had certainly manufactured something entirely new in United States unlawful accounts. Dr. Harding used the whole remaining years of his lengthy profession diligently following these sinister records and trying to systematically formulate a full comprehension of precisely what Timothy Caldwell truly stood for to the general public. His personal diaries, which were only found following his passing in 1891, contained hundreds of accurate sheets scrupulously recording instances that might possibly have included Timothy, along with deep academic debates regarding the core character of malevolence and the serious chance that some people might genuinely be born lacking the basic potential for inner morals or ethical thought. The wider major consequences of the Caldwell investigation proposed that Timothy was not a deviation. He was a look into what human beings might evolve into when removed from the ethical and emotional restrictions that we deem essential to our disposition. If he lived to maturity, then somewhere in the United States there travels a man who comprehends human mental function better than any educated specialist, who can influence people with extraordinary expertise, and who regards the remainder of humanity as nothing more than entities for research. This riddle reveals to us that malevolence can wear the appearance of purity, and that our presuppositions about youth and human disposition may be perilously unaware. The situation of Timothy Caldwell compels us to face uneasy inquiries about the character of ethical growth and the chance that some people may be born lacking the potential for compassion or inner morals that we regard as basic to all people. What do you personally believe about this narrative? Do you suppose every detail was exposed, or might there still be more to Timothy Caldwell's actual destiny than the formal documents indicate? Leave your remark below and let us know your ideas regarding this unsettling section in United States history. If you liked this account and wish for more scary stories similar to this, subscribe, press the alert icon, and share with a person who loves secrets as sinister and complicated as this one. Always recall, the truth is frequently more frightening than imagined stories, and history retains hidden facts that continue to question our comprehension of human nature. We will see you in the following recording.